I have here two heads today. The first one, as has been described, as president of MedPharmPlast Europe, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what that does. And secondly, my day job, which is as head of market segment healthcare for Clariant. And Clariant is one of the companies who modify the plastic. Okay, so anything that goes into the plastic from a color or an additive point of view, Clariant is one of those companies who pollutes the plastic, let's call it. And it's been very good from the presentations that have come earlier, where everybody's talked about well-characterized materials and how important it is to have good communications with your suppliers, and the supplier's going to tell you everything about what they put into the plastic. I'm sorry to say you're going to go from here disappointed. Okay. But the first thing about managing risk is to understand where risk comes from. So I hope I can, in the next 25 minutes, shall we say, give you at least a perspective from raw materials suppliers' point of view, what is possible and what's not. Okay. So Clariant Healthcare Polymer Solutions, just quickly through, this is basically a dedicated team of experts. We operate GMP ISO 13485 plants around the world. So if your plant happens to be struck by coronavirus, then we have two other ones that make the same stuff around the world and also allows you to move stuff around the world. Validated, by the way. We do a lot on regulatory testing. I'm very, very happy that Nelson Labs is a key supplier to us in this area. Not just to do the testing, but also giving us a lot of advice on what we should test and how we should test it, and interpretation of those test results. So it's not just about doing the test and saying, okay, here's your test results, pass, fail. There's a lot of discussion goes on. Minimizing risk of changes. I think the previous presentation stressed this in particular, where you do all this testing, you spend a fortune on doing extractables, leachables testing, and then the question is it the same in production today, tomorrow, next week, in 5 years' time, 10 years' time, or more importantly, in the way people do risk assessment, is it the same today as it was 10 years ago? And there are very big doubts in that from a practical experience point of view. We're involved with all these different areas of the medical device chain, so drug delivery, invasive diagnostics, pharmaceutical packaging. We don't deal directly in implants, so that's one area we do not touch. So MedPharmPlast, my second head, sorry, change the head. Basically, MedPharmPlast is a sector group of European Plastic Converters, which is the trade association that deals with anybody who does something to a plastic, so transforms it. So it's part of Plastics Europe. Basically, there are a set of companies that represent the complete supply chain. I'm going to show you why that is important. We have a regulatory task force, which I sit on, which is really cross-industry experts. We have people coming from medical devices, polymer suppliers, converters, test labs, etc., who sit on this task force. So you really have a group of experts, which is pretty unique in the industry. We provide updates on what are the EU regulations, and more importantly, the interpretation and their impacts on the plastic supply chain and our members. And also it's a forum for our membership to share their views and their experiences. We prioritize, obviously, patient safety. And basically, we are an opinion former with the legislators and the working groups, the stakeholder groups that are bringing in these new regulations on how they should interpret various different subjects. So the European Commission, the stakeholder groups there, come to us and ask our inputs based on particular topics. So, for example, reprocessing of plastic medical devices. What I mean by vertical organization is, you can see here, so we start basically from the bottom of the chain, the polymer suppliers, right the way through the plastic converters, the material testing houses, Nelson Labs, and the final medical device and pharma companies. Okay, and so you look at that and we combine roughly many hundreds of years of experience on these different areas. And we don't always agree with one another. So this is also creates constructive discussion. Having looked at those things, these are some of the things we do and how we create value. I'm not going to go through all the list, but we already have done quite a lot in position papers. So we talked a little bit about phthalates, so some of our members gave inputs to that. The titanium dioxide was a big success story because for those of you who are not aware, there was an attempt to make TiO2 a carcinogenic substance, which means you need to stick dirty labels on your medical devices saying contains carcinogenic substance. Titanium dioxide is obviously used in all white packaging, but maybe you don't know it's used in pretty much most medical devices that are opaque. So it has the base to actually make the plastic opaque. So every medical device could potentially have been impacted. We also have outreaches, obviously to the notified bodies, also to other trade associations. So we're involved also in looking a little bit beyond our boundaries of Europe. And we say very clearly to those of you who would like to join this organization, and we really encourage you to do so, is you don't really need to be a plastics expert, but you will become one. You will really start to understand how the plastic supply chain works and how, more importantly, it impacts your medical device. So, if you're interested, we have a little stand on the tour. You can come and talk to us. We have a conference coming up in summer, which you're welcome to come to. Lila, could you just stand up, please? So Lila is there if I'm not there, and I won't be tomorrow because unfortunately I have to fly back tonight. But please talk to Lila, and we're very happy to give you more information. Okay, so that's the kind of introduction. So let's get to the meat. So MDR, IVDR, plastic raw materials. So you think your plastic supply chain can help you give good characterization, give lots of information? Great. Okay, so you think it can. Well, let's maybe look at that in some more detail. It's MDR and IVDR is only one of a set of complex regulations that are slowly coming through. You have several related topics here which in the end say one thing: expectation that you have well-characterized materials. And we've talked a little bit about what does well-characterized material mean and how you get information. Okay. So how well is the industry prepared for MDR? There was a little survey which I quite liked. In 2018, 78% of the people asked said they weren't ready. There was a survey done just 3 weeks ago where I think between, on a scale of 1 to 5, I think the number who were on 3 or below 3 was still in the high 60s. So the industry is generally not prepared for this. And perhaps a few who do have a strategy for addressing this maybe don't have a strategy to deal with the subject of no grandfathering. So meaning just because you have something approved doesn't mean you will have it approved under the new regulation. Okay? And then it doesn't really necessarily address how you actually get the information from the supply chain. Okay, and inevitable changes. So what I'm going to show you is a little bit on how this information flow is working and how perhaps it could work. So we've already talked about this, so I'm not really going to go into the detail, but the important thing is there's 150 substances listed under MDR as substances of concern. The bad news is that list could go up as many as 1,500. Okay. There's also some issues. We talked about nanomaterials. Although nanomaterials is considered under the MDR, as already been stated, there isn't really a good agreed definition. So when I agreed, I mean the supply chain hasn't agreed to the definition that the EC would like to have. Okay. The list is similar to, but not the same as REACH SVHCs. Okay. So then there is the question of actually how to keep up to date with all these things going on, because the lists are updated every 6 months. okay, particularly in REACH. One of the things MedPharmPlast has done is to create a comparison tool where we look at what's in SVHC, what's under MDR as CLPs or whatever, and we have this tool that gives you the information. And this is something that is updated every quarter. So let's look at the supply chain. This is the supply chain you're dealing with, and I'm going to look at some of the issues. And you'll see some interesting numbers come up here, where this is the market participation, meaning the percentage of the total supplied products that healthcare represents. So the one figure that's bandied about is polymers and is well understood, and everybody agrees it's around 5% of the total marketplace. So consumption of medical plastics or polymers in medical devices or pharmaceutical packaging is around 5% of the total. Okay. When you come on to what can go in the plastic, you start to get in some really interesting numbers because there's no data. This is my personal estimate. Okay. So less than 0.1% of all these things going in here, pigments, slip agents, surfactants, etc., come into healthcare. When you look at concentrates and compounds, so these are the methods of delivering the color or the additive and incorporating it into the polymer, you see around 3%. So the healthcare industry, I'm afraid to say, from a volume perspective, is not really interesting for any supplier. Okay, we need to keep that into mind. Okay. So this also hides complexity. Okay. When you look at a colored medical device or any colored plastic, like this blue, for example, everybody thinks it's one color. It's not. It's typically got 5 different components, okay, to arrive at the color shade, and one blue is never the same as another. We have 80,000 in Clarin, 80,000 live product combinations, I mean colors, polymer combinations, 80,000, and those are live ones. Okay. Healthcare industry is interesting despite the low volume. Okay. Information flow coming up and down the supply chain is going to be a question of the interest, i.e. the interest of our companies to sell into the medical device space versus the risk. Okay, so the more risk that comes onto us, the less we're interested. So this balance will be quite important to making the regulations work. The real supply chain is not a straight line. This is a chart that was produced by Siemens to analyze their supply chain. And just to look at this, the complexity here, you see all these cross things going around one supplier as another. So we're not dealing with a straight line. Okay, so it's more complex than I've presented it. So let's look at really the issue. As we've already said, you as a brand owner, and in this case the brand owner is the person who's putting the thing on the marketplace, is in this position here. You need to know what is in your medical device. Okay? And because you have to do this risk assessment, you have to test, and it's good to know before you test what's in it. And you have to create your dossier, and you have to convince the notified body that all of this is good and fine and everybody's happy. And so what you do is say, okay, I'll ask my supply chain. Please tell me what's in. Okay. The problem is back down here, which is the start of the process, we have a problem. Firstly, what is in a formulation is a trade secret. Okay. Also, they only test for substances they expect to find, okay, or are legally obliged to do. So there's an SVHC listed under REACH, then the person who makes the pigment or the stabilizer is obliged to test for that SVHC and say whether it is in or not. Okay, so there is a legal requirement. The problem also comes is there's multiple sources for ingredients. So anybody who's looked at this and understands what CAS numbers are, chemical abstract substance number, there is an assumption that every chemical abstract substance number is the same. I can show you on other presentations why it isn't. So the same CAS number from 2 different suppliers will have different peaks in an FTIR than its comparison to another. Okay? So there's a problem, multiple sources for the same ingredients. Then we have our good friends in the legal department who say, well, even if we have tested for that substance and we know it's in, we're not going to tell anybody because that creates a liability. Okay, so this is resulting in a situation that what happens is you say, not intentionally added. I think we talked about this earlier. Now, for the question is for the person sat at the end here who would like to know what's in, is not intentionally added a good news? Answer, no, it isn't. But this is the reality. Okay, so this is what we have to deal with. Okay, so the other problem we touched on earlier is, so supposing you have a great supplier who's giving you all this information, you've done your analysis, and everybody's happy, you know, you got your dossier complete. Well, yes, but providing nothing changes. Okay, and the industry is littered with changes that have happened somewhere down the supply chain and have a consequence on a leachable. You know, you go to conferences on extractables, leachables, you'll hear about horror stories where somebody changed an antioxidant and suddenly, you know, they have an antioxidant migrating into the drug. It's littered. Change control is probably the most important subject, in fact. So, I'm going to give you some examples here of what, in fact, requests that come to us, okay, and why we have to respond to those a certain way, okay. These are real, actually, questions. Please confirm that your plastic product is compliant to MDR, IVDR. Answer is, we can't. A raw material cannot be compliant to MDR. The final device has to be. So they get a response, sorry, we can't confirm compliance. Please provide a statement on does not contain. We cannot do that because we do not test for 150 substances in each of those pigments that we use, and neither does our supplier. Okay, so we cannot confirm or deny whether a particular substance is present or not, as I explained earlier. And the question is even if we could, is it relevant? Because if it's a one-time test, how does that change from batch to batch? Okay. The other thing that quite often happens, we have from some of the people saying, this is our questionnaire database, please fill this in. Yes, no, because of the above is not really possible. And secondly, our legal departments in big companies won't allow you to do that because it creates a liability. Okay, we didn't do it under REACH, and we're certainly not going to do it under MDR. Okay, every medical device company has its own custom list, so it means if your company A, you have a different list than company B, C, D, E, it's not going to work. We have product stewardship people, but there are not enough of them to be able to fill in all those nice documents. Okay. And finally, the subject is, please inform us if something changes. Well, what's something? It's raining outside. Does that change? Well, it might have an impact on your process. Maybe. So this is potentially the biggest issue. So what can we do? So the first thing we did is, as MedPharmPlast, is to sit together and say, okay, what could we do? Okay. The first thing is very important that we engage with the stakeholder meetings to make sure that whatever legislation is coming through is sensible. Yeah, like not having titanium dioxide as a carcinogen. Okay. Develop cross-member position papers that support MDR and IVDR, and I'll give you an example next. To further work with people who are already trying to make definitions. So for example, VDI in Germany have defined what they call a medical grade polymer. Okay, you should be careful of that definition because somebody once told me there's no such thing as a medical grade polymer. There are polymers which are used in medical. Medical grade polymer builds up the expectation of something that's specifically produced for medical. Nobody does that. No pigments, no polymers are ever made as medical grades. They're the same grades that get used for automotive, but they are controlled in a different way. So our commitment, basically our commitment to the customers, you in the end of the room, is to bring knowledge, your marketplace, the regulations and how they impact the plastics. Okay, so MedPharmPlast members will continue to do that. We rely on this cross-industry expertise and is really, as we said, the only one-stop shop that exists. That covers the complete supply chain. We'll be open. We'll attempt to answer your questions based on best information, and if we can't, we tell you why not. It's no good saying no, we need to explain why. We will provide supporting documentation. I'll come back to that in a middle. Particularly for grades that have been defined as for use in medical, pharma or healthcare, we can provide, in some cases, some members can provide specific declarations related to a standard like USP, Class 6, ISO 10993, whatever. We have our members who are already testing their materials to those standards. We will give change notification on healthcare products, okay, which covers the risk management process on raw materials, processing, etc. The only thing to note is this only reduces the risk of change, it does not eliminate it. If my pigment supplier back here suddenly decides to change his manufacturing process, he ain't going to tell me. It relies on me doing my incoming raw materials inspection that tells me if there's been a change or not. What we can provide? We'll give you a composition disclosure to the brand owner, which consists of the cast number and the percentage. Note to the brand owner. Okay, normally restricted under NDA because this is our confidential information. So we're not going to supply it to your purchasing department who, will say, well, I can buy that material cheaper somewhere else. We don't do that. Okay? We will give you a declaration based on what is listed under REACH SVHCs or what is in the potential list of SVHCs. We'll give you declaration of CMR-ED substances that are not SVHCs but are intentionally added. For anything that is not fitting 1 or 2, you'll get a not intentionally added statement because we do not test, and neither does our supplier. We'll give you a declaration of content animal-derived substances, which starts to become an issue also raised because of the MDR. We can provide, or some of our members can provide, specific healthcare tests where available. These are not intended to, shall we say that your medical device is compliant. It's meant to provide you information and reduce your risk of future testing. These are the kinds of things, for example, Clariant can provide. We do routinely on the raw materials we will use. So we're doing right the way through from ICH-Q3D, Pharmacopoeia USP 661.1, the old version that was published and now is not, and the USP 8788, blah, 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 blah. We do change control. So this also is reflective of what some of our other members are also doing. So anybody who is really serious about healthcare and is invested in healthcare usually is doing at least some of this. So we can provide you information that supports your risk assessment, doesn't avoid you doing final testing, but does support that process. So in one summary, this could be your strategy for MDR. Maybe it's been like that. As we said, the kick up the arse or the train coming, whatever you want to describe it, is coming pretty quick. And there is a better way on a common understanding. Risk management, as I said at the start, is really important that you understand where risk comes from. If you understand what the questions are, then you can figure out what the answers are. You can talk to somebody, you can talk to experts. You've heard from some of them in this room earlier. You could talk to Nelson Labs. They can help you define a test program if you know what is in and how maybe you can get information that helps your study. So in summary, for successful implementation, understand and accept what is possible to provide and what is not. Understand plastics materials are not automatically medical grade, and in most cases don't cover any modifications. So even if you have a medical grade polyethylene, for example, immediately you want to make it white, you just polluted it. It's no longer just a polyethylene anymore. Okay, so you need to take account of the modifications. Understand well-characterized material does not mean one that you've used for the last 20 years. The FDA has said quite clearly now on predication of medical devices that anything that's older than 10 years old, if you're using that in your 510K filing, forget about it. Has to be younger than 10 years old. Consider MDR, IVDR, the weakest link will be the substance supplier at the back of the chain. So make sure your supply chain is controlling the back of the chain and not just the first tier. Consider supply chain risk reward may mean the provide the information or else tactic will not work. Yeah, so we have some of our customers who are big OEMs come along to us and say, you either supply this information in the database as we expect it, or you don't be a supplier. And frankly speaking, we say, okay, because we don't have the resource to do this for everybody. Consider industry standard input database. This is important for you as a group here to talk together, and maybe there's another forum to do this. Is Siemens Healthcare concluded that with the complexity of the supply chain, unless they tried to develop an industry standard methodology for gathering this information, they were going to be in big problems. Okay, the automotive industry already faced this problem 10 years ago with the waste directive, and they developed a software system where every point of the supply chain inputs their contribution. They can figure out down to milligrams how much cadmium they have in a car. It's not perfect. You can see, sorry, they invested, whoa. They invested 20 million euros. They have 80 million data points per car. Okay, so this is not a mean task, but this may be a way forward to have some kind of standard methodology of inputting the systems. So if I haven't convinced you already that you need to be a part of MedPharmPlast, then I failed in my task, and I apologize to Lilla. If I have, come and talk to us. We're having our summer conference in Hamburg on June 17th, 18th. You're welcome to participate as a guest to find out more. Again, Lilla will take information from you if you're interested, and we'll be in contact with you. And the reason I stress this is it's not just the organization as it is today. Any new members who come in bring new knowledge, different ways of approaching, different information, and this is why I think we build up our expertise, so everybody wins out of it. Okay, thank you very much.